One of the great, really simple pleasures that I get to enjoy when I go out west to visit with my parents, besides spending time with my parents, one of the great simple pleasures that I experience there is the sound that the quail make. Little tiny birds, have you ever seen them? We don't have them around here, so I don't get to hear them here. That's why they're so precious to me. But it's a sound from my youth. They're little tiny birds with a little kind of a feather top knot on top of their head. And they'll talk, and they have a very, very unique call. So I enjoy that call. And the sound that they make when they do that is, as the saying goes, music to my ears. Are you familiar with that saying? It's just a way of describing something, a sound or even an experience that brings us pleasure. It's music to our ears. And many of us have those sounds, those experiences in our memory that, they're music to our ears. We do. Maybe it's the sound of our children or our grandchildren laughing, or the sound that geese make when they're flying overhead when you first see them in the spring when they're migrating north, that harbinger of spring. The sound that they make as they exhort one another. Or maybe it's the sound of a loved one's voice. Those things that bring us pleasure, that make us feel good. You gotta love those pleasant things that are music to our ears. You really do, because that's not all that we encounter in life. We encounter other things that are decidedly unpleasant, things that are not music to our ears, things that kind of grate on us, like the sound that fingernails make when they're drug across an old-fashioned blackboard. Or that hissing sound that compressed air makes as it leaks out of your tire. The screech of a dry bearing when you're already running behind. And all of us who have raised small children, especially if we have more than one in the house, we know those other unpleasant sounds. You know the ones I'm talking about. He's touching me! She's looking at me! They won't let me have a turn! Right? And on it goes. Many of us have heard ugly words issued as insults or raised in anger that haunt our memories for months and years after they were first uttered. And those sounds, those memories are certainly far from being music-like. And none of us care for those unpleasant or those hurtful things that we experience, right? Making sense so far? Music to my ears is good, brings joy to our heart. Unpleasant sounds or experiences, not good. Now, with that thought in mind, I invite you to look again at the passage from Paul's letter to the Ephesians in your bulletin inserts and kind of realize where we are by this time in the letter. Early on in the letter, Paul addresses the theological points that he wants to cover, saved by grace through faith and that sort of thing, which is good. It's good to know. But by the time he gets to the part of the letter that we visited today, Paul has gotten down to telling people the practical ways that they should be living out their lives as people of faith, which is also good. It's good to know those things. It really is. And Paul tells us again today to be filled with the Spirit, meaning that we're to welcome God into our very souls, allowing God to be an integral part of our lives, to help us be the people God would have us to be. And then he also tells us this. He says, sing and make music to the Lord in your hearts. Let's hear that one more time. Sing and make music to the Lord in your hearts. But what can that mean? Making music to the Lord in your heart. What is he talking about? In Mark's gospel, we kind of see God's slant on this. In the 7th chapter, we encounter these words from Jesus who says, don't you know that nothing from the outside that enters a person has the power to contaminate? That's because it doesn't enter into the heart, but into the stomach, and then it goes out into the sewer. And by saying this, he declared that no food could contaminate a person in God's sight. But then he goes on and he says this part, and this is important. He says it's what comes out of a person that contaminates someone in God's sight. It's from the inside, from the human heart, that evil thoughts can come. You see, it's what comes from within us, from in our hearts, from our very souls, that essence of who we are that either pleases or displeases God. That shows him how we feel about being his people. How ready we are to obey those commandments that he told us were most important. Remember that? When he was asked what the most important commandment was, he says, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. All the law and the prophets depend on these two commands. He is telling us that loving God and loving our neighbors are of the utmost importance to life on this earth as God would have us to live it. So whenever we allow ourselves to think, even before we do it, whenever we allow ourselves to think that it's really okay to denigrate or abuse or exclude or neglect any of our neighbors, whenever we choose not to treat them in the same way that we want to be treated ourselves, we are from the very depths of our hearts raising up an unholy clamor that is deeply offensive to God. Whenever we think about being mean to the people around us, when we think that they don't matter, when we think that we're better than them, we are raising up a noxious noise to our God. But on the other hand, whenever we reach out in love to those around us, whenever we care for those who have not yet done anything to really earn our favorable treatment, whenever we do that, whenever we plan on doing that, we are without a doubt doing those things that are music to the ears of God, things that bring our God pleasure. We make music to the Lord in our hearts whenever we adopt and maintain a mindset that constantly seeks to treat those around us in loving ways. You see, when it comes to being a music maker in the way that our God desires, it doesn't matter if you can sing like an angel or play an instrument like a professional or if you can't carry a tune in a bucket. You can still make music to the Lord in your hearts by adopting and maintaining this mindset that continuously places all human life on an equal plane with your own. Whenever you stop looking at or thinking about some of your neighbors as things to be exploited or rejected or excluded or ignored, and instead you allow your heart to see them as people who are as fully worthy of love as you deem yourself to be, you are, at that very moment, making music to the Lord in your hearts. You see, each and every one of us, every single one of us, whether we're young, whether we're old, has the ability to be music makers. We do. Because you can make music in your heart, something that is pleasing to God, wherever you are. And the cool thing is, you can do it as much as you want. You can. Just seek to treat those people around you like you'd like to be treated yourself. Help the people that you can help. Defend the people who are being oppressed. Feed the hungry, whether their hunger would be in their body or their spirit. Feed them. Visit the sick and the lonely. Spend time with those whom society oftentimes overlooks or ignores. Spend time with them. Listen to them. Share the love of Christ with them. Because would you do that, you're making music. You're making music to the Lord in your heart. And that pleases God. So let each and every one of us earnestly strive to be the music makers, if you will, that our God would have us to be. by making music to the Lord in our hearts, by loving our neighbors just like God loved us. It's like he loves us now. Doesn't wait for us to be perfect before he loves us. He loves us anyway. You know how it works. Go out and do it. Make music to the Lord in your hearts. Love your neighbors without condition, without stopping. Be the music makers that God desires you to be. And praise be to God for giving each of us the ability to make music to him in our hearts. Amen.